Chapter 6. Henry was easy to follow. His bald strip set him apart, and once again, inside the grade 1 classroom, he was a head taller than the other boys. The teacher took RedWolf's hand and led him to the front of the class. All the boys stared at the newcomer with expressionless faces, everyone except Henry, who sat at the front and center, with a scowl on his face. "Say good morning to George," the teacher instructed the class. "Good morning to George," they said in unison. Henry rolled his eyes at their stupidity. Turning to face RedWolf, the man pointed to his own chest. "Master Evans," he said, several times over until RedWolf was able to repeat the name perfectly. This pleased the man, who smiled and tousled the boy's hair for a long time. RedWolf felt uncomfortable. Master Evans showed RedWolf a name tag that said George. All of the other children except Henry had similar name tags pinned to their shirts. When RedWolf successfully sounded out each letter of his new name, the teacher beamed and pinned the new name tag on him. Then he pointed at Henry. "Henry, you may go back to your old desk now." The big boy moved quickly to the back row, obviously happy to be returning to his old location. The teacher steered RedWolf by his shoulders to the empty desk. "Sit down." RedWolf understood. He slid across the smooth oak seat that was still warm from Henry's backside. He wriggled around, slipping and sliding on the well-worn surface. Suddenly, a ruler smacked down on RedWolf's desk, a fraction of an inch from his arm. He jumped and let out a startled yelp, inadvertently banging his knees on the underside of the desk. "Sit still." RedWolf understood that too. Some of the boys were giggling, almost inaudibly. But Henry's laughter was loud and scornful. Master Evans' voice was shrill. "Silence!" The boys were quiet, and RedWolf leaned and learned another word. The teacher turned his back to the children with a short white stick, while the short white stick made marks on the large blackboard that hung on the wall. RedWolf knew that there must be tracks his father had spoken of, the white man's signs that he must learn before he could leave school. He gazed at the marks and hoped for understanding, but it didn't come. The children lifted the tops of their desks, took out slates, and worked at copying the teacher's writing, their faces furrowed with concentration. RedWolf did the same. He clutched the smooth stick of chalk in his fingers, chewed on his lower lip, and contemplated how to start. He made his first mark. The chalk screeched and snapped in two. RedWolf was mortified. The teacher directed a chain of meaningless words at him, and he felt everyone's eyes bore into his back. He wished he could disappear. He closed his eyes tight, but when he reopened them, he was still in the classroom, still at Bruce County Indian Residential School, still far from his parents and Crooked Ear. He picked up half the chalk and made the same tapping sound as the other boys. Master Evans was a small-boned, almost to the point of being fragile. He was nothing like Mr. Hall in size or weight. His voice was small, too, and he carried only a ruler, not a cane or strips of leather. Even so, when he walked up and down between the rows of desks, RedWolf was afraid, and as his footsteps got closer, RedWolf tensed in anticipation of punishment. He knew that the marks he was making on the slate bore no similarity to those on the blackboard, just as the tracks made by Crooked Ear's paws were different from those made by the split hooves of a deer. By the time the teacher peered over his shoulder, sweat from the palms of his hands had dampened his slate. Master Evans unclipped a thick wad of felt from his belt and leaned over. RedWolf flinched. Master Evans wiped the slate clean. "Try again," he said. RedWolf breathed a sigh of relief. In the way of the people, he who whistles had taught his son to observe, to watch, and listen. RedWolf was only 5, but he could identify a bird from its song. He could recognize the thumping hind feet of an alarmed rabbit, the huffing of a rutting elk, the bark of a vixen calling her mate, the caw of a raven when food was close. He could even gauge approaching weather by listening to the wind and feeling it on his skin. So in the confines of the school where language gave him little information, he watched how hands moved and how facial expressions changed. He listened to tone of voice and inflection, unconsciously knowing that these things gave meaning to unfamiliar words. It didn't take RedWolf long to realize that Master Evans' voice rose in pitch just before he expected an answer. In response to that higher pitch, some boys threw one arm in the air and spoke in the foreign language. The master smiled and stroked their hair and spoke words that sounded happy. RedWolf didn't have any answers in the new language and decided that silence would be the best way to stay out of trouble. When the teacher spoke directly to him, RedWolf looked at his desk and anxiously fingered the scratched surface, worrying at a splinter until it broke free from the gouged wood. The teacher's sudden grip of his arm surprised and hurt him. The boy jumped to his feet, words of the people flying out of his mouth before he could catch them. "Ouch, that hurts! Let me go!" The man wrestled him to the corner of the room, pushed him on his knees, made him face the wall. RedWolf stifled a yelp as the ruler slapped across his buttocks. He heard Henry snickering. RedWolf was grateful, at least for one thing. He was facing the wall, so no one could see him crying. But when tears escaped onto his cheek and dabbed at them with his hand, Henry's snickers turned to full-blown laughter. "Henry, stop laughing," Mr. Evans ordered. RedWolf learned another phrase. He felt as though a long, long time passed. He looked up to see the round face of a ticking machine that hung on the wall. He had no knowledge that it marked the passage of time, but he watched the little pointers move. One that had made the ticking noise advanced around the circle more quickly than the other. When both pointed straight up, the school bell clanged again, and the children got up from their seats. "Stand up, George," Master Evans said. RedWolf tried to stand and was aghast. His left leg was missing. He looked down, expecting it not to be there, but it was. But it wouldn't move, and it felt heavy like a stone. He hopped on his right leg, dragging the useless leg behind him. "It's gone numb from kneeling," Master Evans said, seeing the dismayed expression on RedWolf's face. "It will be fine soon. Don't you worry." The advice didn't help RedWolf, since he didn't understand, but the circulation soon returned, bringing it with an unpleasant tingling. He hobbled after the others along the corridor towards the refectory. Henry turned and waited for him to catch up. RedWolf limped towards him, watching the expression on his face. By the time he was close enough to read the malevolence in Henry's eyes, it was too late. Henry's fist sank into his gut, doubling him over, forcing him backwards with a grunt. He staggered and fell to the floor. "Henry!" Master Evans shouted. "Come with me! To my office now!" Henry threw a disdainful glance at RedWolf and then walked away with Mr. Evans. In the refectory, Turtle, the boy who had spoken to RedWolf at breakfast, beckoned him with a subtle movement with his chin. After the encounter with Henry, RedWolf wondered if he should ignore the gesture, but he read no malice or contradiction in Turtle's face, only open friendship. Turtle slid along the bench enough for RedWolf to squeeze in. The two boys didn't speak, but the closeness made RedWolf melt inside. He almost cried. The midday meal was stew. It was not as good as his mother's. It didn't smell or taste smoky the way food should, but the chunks of potato and ragged cubes of fatty meat warmed his stomach. Apart from the slurping and scraping of spoons, there was silence. RedWolf wiped his bowl clean with a hunk of bread, hoping that there would be more, but there wasn't. He was pleased, at least, that his dish was so clean it didn't need washing. Nevertheless, he had to wait in line to go through the ritual. After dishwashing, Turtle pushed his chin towards the growing line of grade 1 children, and RedWolf understood that he was to line up there. He flashed a smile of gratitude to Turtle, but the boy was already hurrying away. RedWolf glanced around for Henry and was relieved when he realized that, as yet anyway, the older boy was nowhere to be seen. RedWolf followed the grade 1s back to the back of the building, where work clothes hung on numbered pegs. Like a swarm of bees swooping onto the flowers, the boys honed in on their own pegs. RedWolf looked at the washed-out numbers on his hand and tried to find a peg with a number that looked the same. Panic was rising in his throat by the time he spotted it. The same number was stitched across the back of tan coveralls that hung on the peg, as well as on the chest pocket. "So they know it's me from the front as well as the back," he thought. The boots that stood as a neat pair under the peg were numbered too. They had mud on the soles and were creased to the shape of another boy's foot. RedWolf wondered if the boy who had worn them had gone home. He had hoped so. He watched other children untie their school boots by pulling on the free end of the lace. He yanked at his own lace and was relieved when the bow unraveled. He plunged his feet into the work boots. They were much too big, but at least he could wiggle his toes. He tried to lace them, but the process for tying was much more complicated than untying. A man was bearing down on him, a cane tapping on the floor. RedWolf froze like a frightened fawn, hoping the predator would pass by him, but the man stopped. RedWolf crunched down, hands covering his head, waiting for the cane to strike. "Watch," said the man, squatting and tying the lace slowly so that RedWolf could see. "Now you try." After 2 attempts, RedWolf was wearing a pair of laced-up work boots. His feet slipped and slid inside them as he clomped after the other children through the back door of the school to the farm. The autumn sun shone from a clear blue sky, and the air was fresh and clean, but RedWolf didn't notice. He was completely absorbed, watching the man's cane wrap the legs of the boys who strayed marginally from the rigid procession. RedWolf felt a twinge of anticipation that his legs would be the next to be wrapped. No one spoke except for the man. He barked incomprehensible orders, sending boys to different areas of the farm. Finally, RedWolf alone remained. "I'm the farm manager," the man said in English. "They call me Mr. Boss. Here we teach you how to grow food so you don't go hungry again." Ironically, RedWolf's stomach rumbled its half-empty complaint. "The wandering lifestyle you all have, picking berries and hunting, isn't civilized. When the hunting is poor, especially in the winter, you go hungry or even starve to death. Here you'll learn how to grow crops and how to raise animals for food." He pointed to a red cow contained in a pen. The animal knelt and stretched her neck across the split rail fence, her nose pushing aside the purple asters until her long pink tongue could wrap around a clump of orchard grass. Then she staggered to her feet with the prize. RedWolf heard the grass fibers tear and watched the cow's jaws grind slowly back and forth. For a few seconds he felt at peace. The strike to his leg was light. It barely hurt at all, but it surprised him enough to make him yelp. "Pay attention when I speak," the man ordered, shaking his cane at RedWolf, "and come with me." He guided RedWolf to an area of a weedy pasture. "Here's the new worker," he said to a brown-skinned youth who was shouting commands at the younger children. "Looks like you need him. I want all this dug by the end of the week. Think you can do that?" "Yes, sir, Mr. Boss," said the youth, handing RedWolf a shovel. "I'll leave you in charge, then," the man said as he walked away. Once the boss was out of earshot, the youth spoke, but in yet another language that RedWolf did not understand. RedWolf remained silent, and the youth tried again. "Anishinaabe?" RedWolf nodded. The youth smiled and continued in a mix of English and signs the child understood. "Me no speak Anishinaabe Moen. Me Mohawk. Me name Sparrowhawk. They call me Frank. Top Boy Frank." He spread his arms to indicate that all the boys work in the field. "We many people, Cree, Anishinaabe, Huron, Métis, Mohawk, we speak many tongues. No understand each other. All must speak English." "English," RedWolf said, pronouncing the word perfectly. Top Boy Frank smiled. "Good." He placed his foot on the top edge of the shovel blade and pushed down his body weight. "Dig," he said, "like this." His shovel cut through the turf and deftly flipped it so that the weeds and grass disappeared underneath the fresh brown earth. RedWolf tried, but lacked the strength and technique to cut through the thatch of the vegetation. "You'll soon get it," Top Boy Frank encouraged. "Keep trying." RedWolf tried and tried. It was hard work, and soon he flopped to the ground, exhausted. "Get up," Frank urged, pulling him with one hand. "If Mr. Boss sees you idling, I'll be in trouble as well as you." He pushed RedWolf's shovel securely into the soil and propped the child against it. "Lean on your shovel like this, and look like you're working." In this position, RedWolf watched a robin. The bird landed on the freshly turned soil, and within a second of cocking its head sideways, pounced on the exposed tail of a worm. The robin planted its feet firmly and tugged with all its might. The worm stretched, becoming narrower and paler until it suddenly broke into two. The piece in the earth quickly wriggled back into underneath the soil, but the piece in the robin's beak was promptly dispatched down the bird's gullet. The day before, when RedWolf was still a child, he would have giggled, but today there was no laughter in him. On the neighboring farm, an old man walked behind a plow. The workhorse knew the routine and plodded faithfully along the edge of the furrow. Nate, stop. Throwing her hands, the workhorse knew the routine and plodded faithfully along the edge of the furrow, throwing her weight into the collar. The farmer's athletic hands gripped the plow handles to stop the shear from bucking. It was hard work for a man his age, but when he finished the field and was finally able to take his eyes from the soil, he shook his head and sighed. In the distance, small boys were plowing a field with shovels.